So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Sorcha Nic Lochlainn, who is a Director and Sports Spokeswoman for the Countess. So perhaps, I think with all the speakers, I'd like to hear a little about who they are and where they come from. So if you could just do a couple of minutes introduction about yourself, that would also be spectacular. Thank you.
I'm very short, so I'll stand. First of all, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to come. It's absolutely astonishing to see a room full of such brilliant women and some men, so supportive of our shared cause. My name is Sorcha Nic Lochlainn. I'm now a director of the Countess organisation, and I'm the sports spokeswoman as well. I joined the Countess in 2025. I wish I brought the photograph with me that inspired me to join it, but if any of you look it up, it's the meme of the man playing ladies Gaelic football against the little slip of a girl, and I at the time had quite a sick daughter, and my two younger daughters were playing a different Irish sport called camogie, and I was on the sidelines with them a lot, and getting increasingly concerned about what's happening to women and girls and around gender, and feeling a little bit lost about what I could do with those feelings. So as my older daughter began to recover, I had more energy and time, and I reached out to Laoise de Brún, who founded the organisation, and here I am. So that was in 2022, and I always felt I would use my voice. One of my favourite authors is Terry Pratchett, and he says, "Speak for those who cannot," or something like that. And that's what I'm doing. So forgive me if my voice shakes, but I feel it's better to use it even though it's shaking. I'm going to give you some background on the organisation, because the first question all of you probably have is, who is the Countess and why are you called what you're called? And then I'm going to talk a little bit about our campaigns, what has worked, what hasn't, how that all came about, what the environment is like in Ireland, and then want to talk a little bit about sort of minding yourself and the challenges and rewards of being involved in this fight, and then a bit about hopefully where we're going in the future, and maybe leave you feeling a bit optimistic. I have a tendency to talk fast, so if you can't follow me, please do let me know. So who's the Countess? So Countess Constance Markievicz was an Irish woman, an Anglo-Irish Protestant. She would have been born into a life of fairly privilege, but she chose a different path in life and defied the expectations of her sex. She married a Polish Count Markievicz, and she was living in Dublin. She was very involved in the labour movement in 1913 lockout with James Connolly, and she became involved in the fight for Irish independence. She was a military commander. She was a lieutenant in the army that fought for independence in 1916. She was incarcerated and sentenced to death, which was commuted because of her sex. So she wasn't executed along with the other leaders, but she was kept with them in Kilmainham jail, and she would have been quite offended by the fact that she wasn't executed, although the rest of us were quite grateful. She then became your first female MP in Great Britain. When the first elections were held in Dublin, she was elected. She was still in prison at the time, so she never took her seat. But she was quite an inspiring lady. She was the first Labour minister to be a woman in the whole of Europe, and she really envisaged a state where women and children were taken care of. She always was known for taking care of the ordinary people in Dublin. She was known for carrying bags of turf up the back stairs of tenements, for working in soup kitchens, and really cared for the poor and underserved. So why we're called Countess Didn't Fight for this? Well, after independence, an ideology took hold which attempted to subjugate women and girls in Ireland, and we know that she didn't want that to happen, and we know that she wouldn't have wanted what's happening now to women, where there are men in their prisons and in their sports and in their spaces. So Laoise, who founded our organisation, was really inspired by Countess Markievicz to come up with the name, the Countess Didn't Fight for this. So that's who we are and why. So really into the vacuum that was left by the church in the 90s as their influence began to wane, the new ideology of gender took hold, And an organisation was needed to fight back against that. So in 2019, Laoise began to reach out to people on Twitter. It was quite a hostile environment. There were lists drawn up of known TERFs. There were accounts were being suspended. Everybody was very twitchy. People were being doxxed, but still she persisted. She contacted people and she drew them into discussion about how it could be that we could fight back. The idea, a little bit different from the Women's Rights Network, is the idea of having an incorporated, structured, governed organisation was really there from the very start. Laoise wanted to become a stakeholder, wanted to get her feet under the table, to get our feet under the table. And the idea being that we would be apolitical, non-partisan, non-religious. We're entirely voluntary, and we centre women and children in everything we do. And that broad church approach sometimes brings challenges, as I'll discuss. But it started off with kind of scoping, and all this happened behind the scenes. Nobody really knew that these discussions were happening. But Laoise and her colleagues identified 8 kind of main areas where this ideology was really impacting on society, and she could see really that it was a war of information, and the information was needed in these areas. So you can see the 8 pillars there: single-sex, language, legislation, etc. Some of these we're still very active in, and others, there are other groups in Ireland now that work in that area. So how would we go about it? Well, she developed working groups to look at policy, advocacy, and analysing what was happening in those areas and what could be done to sort of prevent that erosion of rights and safeguarding that was so clear. Tone and messaging, very important from the very start. And really the aim was to shift what's called the Overton window, to make it okay to say that men cannot be women. And that took time, and it took effort, and it took really consistent adherence to quite high standards. So the organisation was ready, and on 11:30 p.m. on September the 29th, 2020, the first tweet went out into the world, and Laoise said, "If no one is willing to stand up for the women in the women's wing of Limerick Prison, we will." She was ready to go. We had social media platforms and a website ready to go. There was positive and negative reactions to the tweet. A lot of people were very happy to see that somebody in Ireland was stepping up and sort of fighting back against what had happened. To give you some background about what the Irish landscape is like, in 2015 we had a really big referendum campaign to change the definition of marriage in the Constitution to be between any 2 adults, regardless of sex. So on the back of that, a lot of conservative politicians would have felt like they needed to show their progressive credentials. Alongside the implementation of that referendum win was a concerted effort to introduce Self-ID, Gender Recognition Act, and that was also introduced in 2015. So consider that 2018 was when we finally got sort of the abortion clause removed from our constitution. 2015, men could say they were women. It started with a medical model that went through 2 layers of parliamentary scrutiny and back around, and in committee stage, right before it was signed off, every single piece of safeguarding in that legislation was removed. There was nothing about medical model, there was no psychiatric model, there was no restrictions for all purposes. Your sex has changed to male or female, and it's quite drastic. If anyone is interested in why they did it so circumspectly, you can have a look at the Denton's report, which maybe you've heard of. But the intention was that this would never ever be debated in public. That the popularity of, I want to say the popularity, it was actually very closely run referendum, but the big celebrations by all the progressive organisations couldn't be overshadowed by people saying, but hang on a minute, men can't actually become women. So they really did it quite circumspectly. Anyway, so what was the response to this tweet and the subsequent actions by our organisation? We had quite a big bit of pushback. So the Gay Community News, which is an Irish sort of newsletter, and Irish LGBTQ community wrote a letter in which they said, let us say unequivocally that the statements of newly launched organisations that seek to defend biology, that's us, or fight gender identity and expression do not represent the wider LGBTI plus community, nor feminists in Ireland. More importantly, they are not organisations at all. They have no governance, no accountability, and they are simply Twitter accounts. Well, our organisation did very rapidly get governance, and that was one of our strong points, I think. They said, we call upon the media and politicians to no longer provide legitimate representation. I just want to let that sink in, because it's really quite shocking. That was buried in the text of the letter. To those that share bigoted beliefs that are aligned with far-right ideologies and seek nothing but harm and division. Together we repudiate their beliefs and call for an end, giving airtime to their despicable brand of harassment. And I just put in at the end there one little quote that I just thought was hilarious. The road to gender recognition was long and public, which is really the most disingenuous statement in the whole letter. So that was signed by lots of organisations, but the most egregious signature on that letter was the National Women's Council of Ireland, who had just recently elected a man onto their board. Sorry, I want to say a man who says he's a woman, so not just any man. And that really felt like such a betrayal to Irish women that they would side with this ideology. They also put a petition up, and when I was doing preparation for the talk, I went on and had a look at the petition just out of interest. It's still active. There's 975 signatures. The letter was written in 2020, so I think we can safely say that's the first piece of evidence that this is a top-down attack on women and children. This is not driven by any kind of grassroots support or popularity. Most people know that this is wrong. So on foot of that, what was our response? We organised a fully global campaign that went fully viral. Maybe some of you remember this. It looks like, you know, it took wings, but it did take a little bit of organisation and acting and asking people to put their faces out there and say, we will be heard. So the stories from that are all on our website, and is really quite powerful. This is the first example of the kind of campaign that maybe any of you guys could start. You know, it's simple, it's to the point, it's a little sign in front of the camera, it's like the XX that followed. You know, they're just really powerful ways of making your voices heard. So Leisha was inspired by the Bring Back Our Girls hashtag, and our We Will Be Heard. It's become sort of evergreen. We use it a lot for the Countess, and we would love for anybody to use it. And it's a direct response to that oppression and silencing of women. So what next? Quite a lot. I've only included some here because I wasn't actively involved in this stage, although I was aware of the campaigns, and so I was picking Leisha's brains during the week, and really there was so much there that I couldn't actually begin to explain what went on in the background. But we are women. We are women. We are not anyone with a cervix. This was an attempt to change the messaging in our health, from our health service out, and really did result in a climb down. And there was a campaign about, sorry, my slides didn't print out very easily, so that's why I keep turning around. The school toilets, where the new designs were released by the Department of Education. I was just talking to a lovely woman at lunch about this, and they really were mixed-sex toilets. This did get onto the media, so despite the letter, there was some media coverage of this, and Leisha was on Joe Duffy, which is like probably one of the flagship lunchtime talk radio in Ireland, where people bring in about all kinds of issues, and Joe talks to them. But it was quite a long-running show. One woman got kicked off for insulting her. She was called her, I can't remember, homophobic anyway, and something else. But it was quite contentious, and there was quite a big pushback for them having had Leisha on the show. We also did protests against the National Women's Council. Saying, you know, obviously they don't speak for women now because, well, it's obvious. We have campaigned against hate speech and hate crime legislation, and there actually was a change in that legislation just recently. That campaign was ongoing for a couple of years. We also did things in the background, lobbying politicians, organising events for politicians to come and meet with women from the Countess and hear our side of things, and webinars and things for our parents. So they're all stuff that sometimes takes a bit of organising, but the posters are pretty good. You can just organise, go out, make your voice heard, especially women's organisations. They need to be told, this is ridiculous. This is ridiculous. You can't just pretend that men can be women. It's just crazy. So one of the big campaign wins that we had was my fellow director spotted in the depths of the general scheme of a bill called the Work-Life Balance and Miscellaneous Provisions Bill. I mean, it's so innocuous. But in that, the removal of the words she and her to mean female, under heading 12, an amendment to delete the word woman entirely from our maternity legislation. Again, this went on Joe Duffy, and 3 days of discussion followed whether or not this was appropriate, and people were really incensed. But after this, RTE, which is our equivalent to the BBC, were called. They never actually went before a parliamentary committee, and they got a bad telling off by Dublin Pride. And since then, it has proved almost impossible to get RTE to speak to us or cover our side of the story in any meaningful way, really. So the most recent breakthrough we had was just after the For Women Scotland win, when they produced an online article on their news website and completely omitted anything from the press release that we had sent them that day. No quote from Leisha, no quote from our side at all, and they subsequently had to amend that piece of that article because there was an outcry. Leisha called them out, and many others commented underneath it that they needed to include the voices of people who would welcome this ruling. So we also went out, we began to campaign. So this is after my time when I joined the sports group, and we went onto the streets then and became a bit more active. So in the top left photograph there, we are campaigning to get people to write to their TDs to support a bill that was introduced, which would ring fence that Gender Recognition Act and certificate and remove prisons from its scope. So it was a major piece of legislation that was drafted by Leisha and introduced to our parliament by an ally called Peadar Tobin, and it really sought to protect the most vulnerable women in Irish society, those with no escape who were imprisoned with men. So that was really popular, people really liked that. So amending the GRA is one of our goals here, and it's a much more pragmatically achievable goal, I think, as Heather said earlier. We have to win where we can, and the idea behind that bill is to really address the emergency, which is that those women are incarcerated with men. We were involved in organising and speaking at Let Women Speak events in Belfast and Dublin, and then we had a referendum campaign. So I don't know how many people are aware of that particular referendum. The idea was to amend a wording of an article in the referendum that referred to a woman's, well, it's called a woman's place in the home, but actually a woman's duty, and that women should be protected from having to work and therefore not being able to care for their families. So we were against the removal of that. It wasn't a good amendment. It did a disservice to women's care, and there was another simultaneous amendment as well that we also campaigned against. They held a referendum on International Women's Day. I think they thought it was going to be like some kind of celebration for the progressive women, to completely erase us from the Constitution. But it was roundly defeated. And that was in thanks to hard work on the ground, grassroots. We went out, we campaigned, we canvassed. We did the work of the government, because in the first few weeks of the campaign, people were saying, can you explain to me what this is even about first? So they'd had no proper information. Then people began to see the problems and the flaws, and eventually the Irish people realised that they were being conned, and they voted against that amendment. I just want to say a little bit. Some of this is about, political posturing and pushing yourself forward, and refer back to earlier speakers. You kind of have to be a bit brazen, and the photograph of us celebrating, the photograph of us celebrating there at the top. Guy from Associated Press was in the room, and he was like, ye have to turn around to the camera now as soon as that's announced and I'll take your picture. Ye have to cheer. And it was like, I was genuinely happy, but I also felt like the biggest posturing ever. But that was it was a really eye-opening day. So we all turned up to Dublin Castle as newbies for the reading of the results. We missed the press scrum at the start. All the politicians cleared out. The only person left at 9 p.m. when they announced the second result, which is the one we were waiting for, was one senator who stood alongside us in the empty room. But it just kind of proved to us that hard work really can pay off, and you have to be willing to sort of put yourself out there. So we also really hot on the heels, and we had this event booked before they announced the date of that referendum, and I don't think I would go back and choose to do such two huge campaigns right off, one after the other. But we organised a conference in the RDS, which is a really prestigious venue. We had speakers from all over Ireland and the UK come to speak, and it was really successful despite numerous attempts to get us cancelled, to get them to withdraw. They had threats. We had to increase the security. We had to have barriers outside. It was really incredibly stressful, but it was so incredibly worthwhile. We stuck to our guns about who spoke. Kelly J. Keane was there. It was fantastic. And I just stuck a photo of me and Fiona McInerney in there because this is my celebrity moment. I rearranged my slides and I forgot, so I'm just going to go back to talking about the media for a second. Because, as I said earlier, we're operating in this media blackout, so how do you actually handle that? It really is difficult. It takes time and energy to get your voice heard in the media. One of the funny things that kind of happened to us is that we ended up with Leisha on international shows before any national broadcaster would have us on. So we had our global and we had local. So we were on local radio a lot during the referendum campaign. We were contacting local radio stations, and they really were receptive to us. National, not so much. And so that's me on the telly there. And I put this in. I listened back to the clip. You know, was on Virgin Media tonight, so it was national. We sent them a press release about the LGFA policy, the ladies' Gaelic football policy, and they said, "Will you send someone on?" And I wasn't really there yet. I wasn't at the stage where I was comfortable, but I just said, well, feck it. How bad can it be, you know? And I'm really proud of old me because I was really nervous, and you could see, you know, my language shifted. How I present now is so different then, but I did it. I spoke for those who couldn't speak, and I think for all of you here who have that shake in your voice, you can't get there if you can't get here if you don't start there. You can't do it if you don't do it, and your voice might shake. And I had a radio interview earlier in the week, and I got the adrenaline shakes immediately afterwards. It just never gets easier, but it's still so important. So if you are somebody who feels you can maybe do it, maybe try it. Just do it. It's rewarding, it's worthwhile, and even though you're scared and anxious and you might have a cry, it's fine. You'll be fine. So I'll skip forward again, sorry. What else we do? So collaboration, I think, is so important, and it's one of the things that maybe we draw flack for from people within the organisation and outside, where they kind of feel like you shouldn't work with those people because they think this about that, or because, you know, they're conservative or they're too progressive, or whatever it is, the reasons why. We are single issue. We will work with almost anyone within the realms of the law. If what they've said about anything does not classify, incitement to hatred, that's fine, let's go. We'll have a conversation, we'll see if we can work together, and we'll try our best to get on with it. And that has resulted in some excellent collaborations down through the years with the German embassy protest, which was 3 or 4 different women's groups in Ireland last year. We had the Vote No campaigns with a couple of different groups, and we sent someone to Paris for the Olympics protest. So that was just really it was just brilliant. And then it's important to do things that serve you, that fill your cup. So we decided we wanted to do something for International Women's Day, but none of us could face knowing that if we organised anything public, we would have to have security, we wouldn't be able to relax, we'd have these guys with the megaphones and the shouting, and it's just overwhelming. So we put this out to known safe people and known safe WhatsApp groups and other organisations, and we just had a picnic down beside Countess Markievicz's statue in the centre of Dublin. We could actually hear the loudspeakers of the socialist feminists down the street with their shout fest about violence against women, and we just had a lovely picnic, and it was just incredible. And I just want to mention the man in the hat there. He's sitting beside a lovely young woman from Radi Colleen, which would be, Colleen means girl, so they're radical feminists, young radical feminists, and they came all the way up from Cork. They were absolutely brilliant. We were delighted to see them. It was like, young faces, hooray! You know, they're going to be okay. They were so lovely. And Paddy is just one of those who stepped outside that media blackout. He left his role in RTE so that he could report on, from outside of Limerick prison. He spoke to the prisoners who were incarcerated with those men. He let their stories be heard on his podcast. He has never stopped advocating for reality, for fairness for women, and his podcast is just an exceptional piece of work. So please do go and follow Paddy's podcast. He doesn't only talk about this, he interviews what I would call truly the most marginalised. He would talk to people outside dole offices, outside methadone clinics. He goes down and talks to people who in graveyards along the street. It's just an incredible piece of work, and he captured the voices of women who ordinarily would never be heard about their experiences in women's hostels and women's prisons with these men who say they're women. And it's heartbreaking, but it's also so important that we listen to those voices because they truly are the most marginalised. Challenges and rewards of being involved in this kind of group. Well, I won't go through the challenges so much because I think it was covered so eloquently earlier. It is difficult to organise groups of women, and I think that is for many reasons. We are all women, and we carry that load of womanhood and motherhood in everything that we do. We have caring responsibilities, and that is difficult to juggle. So our personal capacity waxes and wanes as a result, and you might feel like I need to drop out now for a little while, and somebody else really has to take that up. And sometimes you miss that person and nobody can take it up. And that's quite difficult, it's quite painful, but it's just part of it, and it's something that we have to learn to live with. So if you're somebody whose capacity is waning, give yourself grace, take time, rejuvenate yourself. If you're somebody whose capacity is waxing, find out where that can be used. There can be interpersonal conflict. There are always time constraints. I never ever feel like I'm doing enough, but I'm doing what I can, and I hope that everybody else maybe gives themselves that grace as well. You cannot beat yourself up for not responding to something quick enough, not getting something that you had in your head out there. Just do what you can. And political differences are quite challenging at times as well. But the rewards are just immense. The personal growth, like look at a little me there 2 years ago, and I know so much more about myself, and I know so much more about the world, and I know so much more about people from all different walks of life that I never would have met without this. There's true friendship, but also more than that, this is a meeting of minds, and rather than background. So it transcends class and location and cultural background, and I was talking to somebody else about this during the week. There's some kind of sense of solidarity when you're somebody who has been screamed at in the face by a blue hair with a megaphone that you just don't get anywhere else other than in this movement. When you know you're right and you're willing to go out there, it's quite incredible. We do get to bring out our gifts and talents. This is so Alicia is in the side there. She's probably pretty recognisable, but for those of you who don't know. And then in the middle is the other director for the Countess, who really is one of those minds that can retain and dig information. She discovered that maternity legislation changed. You can ask her anything and she just brings it to mind. But this opportunity has been, I hope she would agree, quite powerful for her as well. And it's just uniquely rewarding, you know. There's not many things you can absolutely say, this is the right side, this is the right thing to do, this is the right thing to lend my energy to. But this is one of them. It really is So I don't like to say the right side of history, but we are speaking at a time of history. People will look back and see what did happen, what went wrong, and how did it get corrected. And it got corrected because of all of you guys, because of all the people who support the Countess in Ireland, all the women and men across the world who are raising their voices now and letting themselves be heard. So, you know, it's an honour to do this work, even though, of course, it's challenging. And so what are we going to do next? We do a summer campaign. We'll be out in the streets again. Our new website has a membership area, so I'm hosting a podcast, which I'm really excited about. We'll be doing lobbying, and we'll be moving into other issues touching on the surrogacy and pornography as well. That affect women. We are stakeholders now. We did what we set out to do. We shifted the Overton window. We got our feet under the tables. We're a voice of credibility for women and for girls and LGBT people in Ireland. Thank you very much for your time.